All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Randy. This is our first episode of If Only an Intellectual Freedom Colloquy, and it is an absolute delight to be in connectivity and community with you again. I enjoyed our time on the panel, the plenary panel at the Common Good Conference, and I'm excited to introduce you to our viewers. Randy Evans is the executive director of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council and has generously offered to give me some of his insight on intellectual freedom. Hi, Randy.
It's good to see you, Sam.
You too. Could you tell us a little bit about your work and your history in intellectual freedom before we begin our questions?
Sure. I mean, uh, I've been hanging around libraries since I was knee high, and when I got my first library card, I thought, I was a big deal. That was sort of like the first step to being an adult was being able to check out books and read what I wanted to read, and so that started me down this path that took me into a long career in reporting, journalism. And when I retired, I moved into this role with the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. And, I'm still at it.
Well, I thank you for being at it and for being willing to field 10 questions that we're going to be asking every panelist in this series. So I'm going to start off. I don't think it's a softball one either. It's how do you believe intellectual freedom contributes to a thriving society?
Well, I think the thing that sets the United States of America apart from many countries is the ability of the citizens to inform themselves. Uh, the founding fathers, maybe with some encouragement from the founding mothers, uh, you know, wrote into the First Amendment to the Constitution, the uh, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, and all of that revolves around people being able to inform themselves, to express themselves. And that seems to have worked pretty well through the years. It has not been without its hiccups at various times. And we're in a period right now where there's a lot of hiccuping going on. And, that troubles somebody, even somebody with white hair, because it's just it goes against my genetic makeup, I guess, for people telling other people that they can't read something or they can't view something. Uh, it's just wrong, and I think what makes us special in the United States is that intellectual freedom. But not everybody believes as strongly about it as I do.
Well, the way that you frame that first question makes me want to kind of add a sub question to that. Do you feel because the foundation and makeup of our society here is so incumbent on intellectual freedom that it's even difficult to imagine what it could possibly look like without it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, you you only have to look at history around the globe, and you see what happens in countries where uh, there is no intellectual freedom, or intellectual freedom is at the penalty of your life, perhaps. Uh,
Right.
and I'm not really very keen, even in my advanced years, at uh, facilitating something like that. And uh, once we go sort of tipping over to the other side, I think it's going to be impossible to come back to the way it was when my hair was the color of yours, Sam.
Well, thank you, Randy. That I think starts us off really good. And as we kind of narrow down on this concept, I'm curious if you could share with us an example or a situation where intellectual freedom positively impacted your communities or organizations that you've been involved in. I love to hear stories.
Yeah. Well, I think, I spent 40 years at the Des Moines Register, and we were uh, we told stories from uh, Ackley to Zwingle,
Right.
from river to river in Iowa, and there are big stories and there are small stories around Iowa where it comes down to intellectual freedom. Uh, you know, I'm born and bred in Iowa. I've lived here my entire life. I take great pride in the state that I hail from. Uh, and one of the things that makes me proud to be an Iowan is the way that Iowans have stepped up at various times. Uh, During the Vietnam War, you saw protests where that comes down to the ability to express yourself, the freedom to express your views. Uh, there was not just one way to view things, uh, and so you see the student protests in Iowa City that I was covering as a young journalism student at the University of Iowa. Uh, you saw it in the United States Supreme Court case involving the Des Moines public schools and the right of students to
Right.
uh, to wear black armbands to express their opinions, where the Supreme Court of the United States said that the rights of students don't end at the schoolhouse gate. Uh, you know, uh, you saw the very first uh, decision that was rendered by the Supreme Court in Iowa when Iowa was but a territory
Right.
uh, in the matter of Ralph. Ralph was a former slave who had come to Iowa, and uh, the first decision of the top court in this place that we call home was affirming Ralph's right to live in freedom. Uh, so that's uh, those kinds of stories. I think ought to resonate with all Iowans, and where we get into trouble, I think, is we start wanting to draw a line. Well, I believe in freedom, except if it goes this far, because
Right.
if you've got 3 million people living in Iowa, you're going to have that line. The line that is too far is going to be drawn in 3 million different locations. Uh, we saw it this week in Iowa with uh, the Satanic Temples display in the Iowa Capitol building.
Right.
Uh, you know, People would be up in arms if somebody took the nativity scene and tossed it into the trash can. Uh,
Exactly.
but we see from the governor of Iowa who is expressing her uh, dismay at this exhibit that's in the Capitol. We see it with political quote unquote leaders who are uh, rapid in their defense of or rapid in their condemnation of
Yeah.
the display, but very slow to react uh, to speak out against the person who has destroyed the exhibit. Uh,
I think you make some really good points here that can be lost on you if you're at a different part of this conversation. So, like whether it's Tinker versus Des Moines in '69, or this example at the Capitol with the satanic display. It's also the freedom to articulate, to share those stories. On the library end, I think about the freedom to curate them and make them accessible. But you're right; it's very speech itself.
Well, and if the the way that we use our rights and our freedoms in the United States, as long as we're not harming other people,
Right.
uh, you know, if you want to read a book that would just cause my hair to curl, Sam, you ought to be able to read that book. Uh, and likewise, if I read something that would cause your hair to curl,
Yeah.
uh, I would hope that you would say, Evans, you ought to go ahead and read that book if that's the way you're wired. Uh,
Definitely. Yeah. Sorry.
and the the way we use our freedom shouldn't be judged right or wrong based simply on whether I agree with you or you agree with me. Uh, because I mean, even in your own family or in my family,
Yeah.
you aren't going to get unanimity of opinion, but we ought to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's what the founding fathers and the founding mothers had in mind. They grew up, they came of age at a time when the king was telling them what they could do or what they couldn't do.
Exactly. So I think it's like you had the questions beforehand and prepped us to be transitioning here, Randy. How did you get, because I think it leads into this next question. I think we're suggesting here for a minute that potentially the First Amendment is a tool, and like a hammer, it can be used to build and to destroy, but the
Yep.
hammer itself is morally neutral. However, a lot of us don't perceive hammers or free speech to be morally neutral. So our next question is kind of what challenges have you observed regarding intellectual freedom, and how can communities address them collaboratively when we have varying viewpoints on this?
Well, I think one of the benefits of growing up in a small town, I grew up in southern Iowa in a town of 2,500 people. Uh,
Nice.
my the high school my kids went to had more students than my hometown had people. So,
Wow.
uh, you grow up in a small town and you realize that your neighbors, uh, may not look like you, they may not think like you, but they're your neighbors nonetheless. Everybody knows everybody, and while that may not be everybody's cup of tea to have their life that exposed to you know their neighbors or the people down the street.
Mhm.
In one sense, though, it makes us part of one community, and it's hard uh, to demean and uh, tear down people that we disagree with when we know them, when we're going to bump into them in the grocery store, at the Casey's, or wherever. Uh,
Right.
you know, I uh, I started in the newspaper business, when I was still in high school, and my first job out of college was in a as the editor of two weekly newspapers in Albia, and uh, you know uh, when you see your audience on the street, when you bump into them at the basketball game in the high school, you see them at the Hy-Vee or the Casey's, they're not hesitating to express their opinions to you, and I think that that is good because you hear the feedback without them cutting you off at the legs.
Yeah.
Social media has been a wonderful tool to allow us to hear what people think, but it has
Yeah.
taken away
Hey, Randy, can I pause
politeness.
here? I know we're recording, but can I pause here for just a second? Somebody's popped in my office real quick. I'm so
Sure,
sorry. I am so sorry, Randy.
it's not a hanging offense. If that's the worst thing that you do to me today, it'll be a miracle.
I'm so sorry. You were talking about folks
Well,
who,
in social media, it has taken away the civility that you find in a small town of 2,500 people. It has given uh, permission, if you will, to have us decide that we're going to savage each other and that that's the way we're going to quote unquote communicate. Uh, and it has brought out the worst of uh, American society. Uh, the ability to try to destroy somebody's uh, reputation or psyche by uh, you know throwing all sorts of incendiary comments about them, trying to denigrate their opinion by demeaning them as individuals, is not really adding to the dialogue that exists. And it we need more of that kind of civil conversation.
yeah,
And I think that's what freedom of speech was all about for many years. You could express yourself without fear of being thrown in jail if you expressed an opinion that was contrary to what the king was saying.
yeah.
Uh, and now, you know, we don't have a king, but you hear lots of people who uh, are keen on locking them up because they disagree with my opinion. Uh, I one of my last assignment at the Des Moines Register was as opinion editor, and
Yeah.
when the Register uh, endorsed Mitt Romney, I had uh, friends and relatives who were questioning the sanity of the Des Moines Register, and so it was the family bond didn't buy any freedom for me. It was didn't put people off limits to be able to express themselves, but uh, we're not as nice to each other as we were before, and I think the country is harmed in that process.
That's fascinating because, we think about blood being thicker than water, but ideology may be thicker in blood. And I'm not sure that's always been the case. Are you suggesting that maybe that's a shift in practice? I know that's a side question, but I'm curious.
No, I think uh, I think it is an indication that uh, people have strongly held beliefs, and you know that may not have you know the opinions may not have been so much different, but the willingness to express them publicly may be different, uh, and certainly the willingness of people who disagreed to express their contrary opinions has not uh, lessened any.
Mm.
I write a newspaper column and I started working in high school for the local weekly. And when I retired from the Register, I told them I wanted to end my career where it started, and that was at the Bloomfield Democrat. So I write a
Oh,
weekly column that is now uh, picked up by anywhere from 6 or 8 to a couple of dozen publications around the state, and I
nice.
get lots of feedback from readers who don't know me, and I think it's indicative of the changing dynamics in our country. When one of them sent me an email because I believe strongly in making myself available for
Yeah.
contrary points of view. And he said that I serve no useful purpose on this earth. And I thought, well,
Oh.
you know, what would he say after he gets to know me? Would he not be quite as polite as he was this time?
Well, you lead right into that conversation, right? Because we hide behind keyboards or tablets, and that does make it not only, I think, extra pernicious, but incredibly
Yeah.
pervasive. So, in the digital age, how do you see technology influencing both intellectual freedom in positive and negative ways? Because that felt pretty negative.
Yeah. Well, I think that technology has made research significantly easier than it was back in the Stone Age when I was a young reporter.
Yeah.
Where, if I was wanting to do in-depth research on a topic, working for the Register, I often would drive to Ames and go into the Parks Library at Iowa State University
Yeah.
because, you know, uh, and I feel like a dinosaur now. I would go pluck from the shelves I think it was called the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature, which was a basically a compendium of articles on, you pick the topic and it would tell you that, here was these publications had something on it. So the process involved spending hours at the Parks Library, 45 minutes driving to Ames, 45 minutes driving back.
Yeah.
And now I can sit at my desk and research government documents, government reports, uh, editorials and commentary and other publications. So it's made it easier, but
Yeah.
uh, it has made it more incumbent upon us uh, as consumers of information to uh, make sure that we're verifying what we are ready to consume, making sure that we're uh, fact checking it, if you will.
I
Technology is only
Yeah.
going to make things more challenging going forward. You
Right.
look at the technological capabilities of creating video basically out of snippets of images and snippets of people's voices and stitching it together seamlessly. So
Right.
it makes me sound like that I'm saying something that I never have, or
Right.
we have video of politicians and political leaders that is completely phony, but it appears to the casual observer that they are saying something that would just cause your eyes to bug out. I worry about uh, how the uh, how the consumer is going to keep up with the advances, and I use air quotes around advances in technology,
Right.
because it is uh, it is making it more difficult for people uh, to ensure that the information they're going to consume is true and accurate.
Well, yeah, and when you do think about AI generated content, you would think it would like diminish the value because of the volume, but now that you don't have to drive, there's still like that cost of databases to protect. So there's like those elements too where we still have to accurately resource it. But then the other question that you bring to my mind is like what is the difference between content versus information versus knowledge, right? That's a lot to contend with. That's a big question.
Well, and uh, you know, this has not changed, but the
Yeah.
uh, the ready availability of tremendously more uh, material uh,
Good word.
has uh, created a situation where the sifting process that the consumer has to go through has become much more of a much bigger uh, task or burden. Uh, I worry that with more information that it makes the task of being an informed citizen more challenging, and without smearing all 3 million other Americans, I think that some of us are maybe a little too casual in what we're wanting to believe. If it seems like something that I want to be true, I'll assume it is true without double checking. Uh, you know, you will see on social media, people will see a headline and repeat the headline without ever reading the underlying article.
Yeah.
And, you know, suddenly this whole, the ease of communication, it takes on a life of its own. And this misinformation that I spread has rolled over and over and gone out farther and farther, and people take it to be a fact when if I had been a little more diligent, I would realize, oh God, that's not what it's saying. uh, so it is important that all of us remind ourselves that there are people out there who have uh, sort of malicious motives to get us to believe a certain thing, and that ranges from political views and political issues to
Yeah.
which consumer product is going to cure that scalp itch. Uh,
That's a good point. So it's embarrassing too. We get it wrong sometimes, right? We get
yeah,
excited that dopamine hit, but also cognitive bias is real and cognitive dissonance is very uncomfortable. So that leads into our next question. Like, you have been a leader and contributor to multiple communities, and I'm just sort of curious how you continue to encourage not only diverse perspective that would make us like that would challenge us and encourage us to get outside of that silo, but also like ensures respectful discourse, right? Because there's
yeah.
pulling other people in and there's course correcting yourself. There's a lot going on there.
Well, and uh, you know, all of this, I suppose, comes back to when I walked into the door at the Bloomfield Public Library for the first time.
Yeah.
Uh, it was all about learning. And it might be learning for fact sakes, or it might be learning just to enjoy the experience of reading a piece of fiction. Uh, but uh, I uh, as a manager of reporters for many years at the Register, I would we would have discussions about a particular story topic and where we ought to go, or what kinds of questions we ought to ask, or who we ought to interview. And I was always a big believer in reminding the reporters that we haven't cornered the market on all the good ideas. And so we owe it to our readers to reach out and to talk with people who have a different vantage point than we had. Uh, and that can involve people from who view an issue differently than we do.
Yeah.
It can be people who have strongly held opinions that just cause us to cringe, but you're not going to know sort of as much as you ought to if you avoid uh, having a conversation, if you avoid interviewing them, if you avoid asking them questions about why or what led you to this. Uh, you, One of the memories I have uh, of the early days in uh, newspapering was
Yeah.
when the Southeast Asian refugees were fleeing as the war in Southeast Asia was changing dramatically, and not in good ways for
Yeah.
their view. And they were fleeing. Governor Ray invited large numbers of them to come to Iowa, and so I have gotten to know a family
Oh,
that climbed off of an airplane at the Des Moines airport 40 plus years ago
wow.
with all of their possessions in, I think it was two suitcases and one cardboard box.
Wow.
Uh, the kids have graduated from the state universities in Iowa. They've got parents have grandkids who are graduating from high school in Iowa, uh, and they have perspective to share, and I would feel like I'm not educating myself uh, the way I should if I didn't take the time to sit down and listen to them, to talk with them. And it's the same, whether you're talking about immigrants or whether you're talking about people on the different side of a political spectrum.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, one of one of my closest friends from my days in Albia,
Yeah.
we, you know, would never agree on things politically. When I told him I was leaving to go to work for the Des Moines Register, he said, "Oh, you're going to work for Pravda," and then and he was saying it with a smile, but you know, we had great discussions about issues, but that didn't mean that we necessarily viewed things the same. But that is what intellectual freedom is about, from my vantage point. It is being able to hear something, to read something, to have a conversation with somebody that I might disagree with or I might agree with.
Right.
We ought not be picking and choosing what is acceptable and what is unacceptable.
I really appreciate you unpacking that. I wrote down the phrase "it's all about learning" because I think you have a great advantage if you decide you're going to be a student for life, right? And by your example, you are teaching others. Just as an aside, when I grew up in Burlington, Iowa, I had family and friends refer to the Hawkeye as Pravda on the Mississippi. And then when it was sold out, they missed it terribly. So you're right. There's just like this give and take with folks where we resent our news sources, but we rely on our news sources, and it's just kind of this back. Hopefully, it's adversarial without being super antagonistic. I'm not quite sure though.
Yeah, well, and I think
Yeah.
uh, the role of the media is to ask questions that Joe and Jane Citizen maybe don't have access to the officials to ask questions of.
Right.
Uh, and there is too much uh, belief on the part of people, and this is not a liberal or a conservative issue. It's people in power and people out of power. Uh,
Yeah.
we ought not be so timid or so uh, unconfident about our own beliefs that we think that somebody asking questions of somebody we support is a negative action on their part. Uh,
Right.
the media's role is to ask those questions that the ordinary citizen doesn't have the time or the access to ask, uh,
Right.
and we ought not stamp the media as pro or con just based on what those questions are, because that's the function that the founding fathers had in mind. Was they wanted uh, a the press at that time to be free to express opinions that might go against the grain, or to ask questions that might cause consternation among those who are in power. And
Right.
that's uh, that's what uh, the foundation was that the United States of America was built on. Uh, the what the founders didn't want was there to be one permissible religion, uh,
Right.
and it's not my role to to say that Sam, your religion is wrong, or that Randy Evans's religion is right. Uh, it's not my place to say that if the Iowa Capitol is going to have the nativity scene in it, that we can't have uh, a display from the whatever a group is that chooses the name Satan's Temple.
Right.
Uh, so uh, we ought to be willing to hear out opinions that don't agree with ours, and that's what intellectual freedom is all about.
So then we have to have these tools, right? So if our founders instituted free libraries, free press, free schools, postage services, what do you, as the executive director of Iowa's Freedom of Information Council, see as essential as policies are bandied about to safeguard information and the freedom to access them for those institutions?
Yeah. Well, I think that uh, Iowa's, we call them sunshine laws, open
Right.
meetings, open records, because it lets the sun shine in on what our government is up to.
Right.
And those laws, the practices have, go back, to the earliest uh, days of our nation, but the laws have been, codified here in the last 50 or 60 years. Uh, and when the Iowa legislature was writing these, they recognized that it was crucial that the citizens have access to what is called the basis and rationale for government decisions,
Mm-hmm.
uh, have access to the records that illuminate what government is considering. Uh, and, when I look at what obstacles there are, uh, cost is one of the big ones. If government prices records beyond the means of ordinary citizens, that's uh, eroding that relationship that has been around since the earliest days of the country. If people can't get access to information about what their government is doing or thinking of doing, then we're a poorer nation as a result. Uh, and government ought not be pricing uh, information beyond the reach of ordinary citizens. Uh, you know, that to me is a non-controversial concept, but real life would tell you the opposite, because I hear all sorts of stories about, oh, public records requests are a burden on government.
Right.
Government belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government officials.
Well, and I can I pull on this thread a little bit because it relates to libraries in a way that I'd be fascinated to get your opinion about. So I'm hearing in rural communities, like book reconsideration policies, right, are kind of adapting to this emerging increase in reconsideration. We know that reconsideration is a form of grievance. We understand that our patrons have a right to have access to policies and procedures so they understand how their government's at play. But what do you do when it is a little bit intense, like on resources? So, what do you think about policies that enable libraries to say you can only reconsider this title once a year. We will only look at reconsideration for like X amount of titles a month because we're talking about time from the board and resources. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to ask you what your take is on that because I have not assembled a philosophy.
Well, I mean, it's uh, the uh, the the situation that you describe is one that uh, is a real life uh, consequence. I mean, if you look at uh, the University of Iowa libraries,
Yeah.
uh, you know, the the staff is, and well, I would acknowledge that uh, just like newspaper editors never have enough reporters, library directors never have enough librarians. Uh,
Yeah.
so I would acknowledge that up front. But,
Hmm.
the University of Iowa has a much larger staff than the East Overshoe Public Library would, where you may have a librarian and a clerk and
Ooh.
a uh, a 6 or 7 member board of directors who get paid nothing, uh,
Yeah.
who who make themselves available because it's a public service, and they believe in the mission of public libraries.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would recognize that uh, you know that East Overshoe Public Library, if you've got one pesky Randy Evans who's coming in every 6 months or every month and
Yeah.
is wanting to uh, set in motion the formal reconsideration process,
Yeah.
uh, that can bring the library's operations almost to a standstill. Where
Yeah.
they have to, and I'm you know your philosophy is still developing. Mine is constantly evolving, but
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I'm just troubled by this notion that as it relates to libraries, that uh, I want to restrict who has access to that book, that one, and that one. Uh,
Mhm.
if I don't want to read them, you know, that's fine. I don't have to. Nobody's telling me that I have to.
Right.
Uh, I I just cringe at somebody who believes that their freedom allows them to dictate what is available for someone else. Uh, I recognize that the relationship between a parent and their child and the library may be different. Uh,
Mm.
where the parent has, uh, in effect, a veto power over what their kid is going to read at the public library.
Yeah.
And that I am less bothered by, where the parents say, I don't want, my child, if he reads these uh, murder mysteries, he's going to be having nightmares, and I don't want to deal with it. Okay,
Right.
I understand. But if that parent comes in and said, I don't want any murder mysteries to be available on the shelves of the public library because it might cause other kids to have nightmares. See, I think that's a bridge too far for me. Uh,
Mm.
and so
Yeah.
I'm troubled by this notion of removing books. Uh, and we're back to technology, and we're also back to money, because
Yes.
you can find anything out there uh, using the internet these days, uh, and you're not even going to find some of that in the biggest public library. But people who say, well, if I don't think that book ought to be available. If somebody wants to read it, they can go buy it.
Yeah.
Well, libraries exist because not everybody can afford, to buy. When I was a kid,
Mhm.
Uh, my parents had in the Evans Library, you
Yeah.
know, the a set of encyclopedias, which
Yeah.
was, you know, uh,
The world.
ready access to lots of knowledge
Yeah.
then, but not everybody was as fortunate. So
Well,
we ought not
abs
be controlling, who is able to inform themselves or who is able to read simply based on access to financial resources.
so to tie all of these thought bunnies together as we go back to that question, I think maybe what we have in common, whether it's like reconsiderations in libraries or making information available without it being a cost prohibitive endeavor, is to structure our government, services with access in mind, and then letting communities decide how they wish to pursue them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But
Yeah.
yeah, uh, it is I'm a whole lot more comfortable with uh, adults having influence over their children than
Yeah.
I am with government or lawmakers or somebody else's parents having influence over my kids. Uh,
And it's the
and
same energy of, well, they can just pay $1,200 for FOIA requests, or they can just get it on Amazon. It's like,
yeah,
that's
well,
not the truth necessarily. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
and I
Yeah,
recognize that uh, libraries don't have a bottomless pit of money available.
right.
Uh, so I understand that there are uh, painful decisions that have to be made about what you're able to do and what you're not,
Right.
uh, and you know uh, that's one of the reasons that I think it is important for uh, people who are fans of libraries to support them. And I'm
Mm,
talking about support beyond just their property taxes. If I
right.
like my local library and if I live in Iowa City and think that that's a wonderful place, I ought
Mm,
to be making a donation to that, just like I do to other worthy causes that I provide support to. Uh, I may not be able to write you a big uh, donation that is going to buy you a new bookmobile, but lots of little donations can make for resources that wouldn't be available otherwise.
it's the thought that counts, really.
The book, you see, when the bookmobile isn't mobile, there's an issue.
So you've really covered our questions so very well, and I think that when I look now at the last two, it's sort of asking like, how do you winnow down on that? Like, how do you champion intellectual freedom? And like you're saying, like fund and resource the services and the opportunities. But then, thank you for letting me preface this one a little bit. I think there's like an Orwellian information will be restricted to us philosophy, but then there's like an Randian philosophy of there will be so much information that nobody will even value it and try to, like you said, sift through it. So as we consider that maybe it's unfortunately both in some cases, how do we encourage that? Not beyond beyond using your library, beyond resourcing things that you hold value in. How do we get those practices encouraged a little bit, do you think, Randy?
Well, and I think it is, uh, we probably need to resort to cloning to clone you so that we can sprinkle you all across the United States or all across Iowa,
Utah.
uh, because uh, it is not a matter of just pushing one button and suddenly we've solved the problem. Uh, it's it is something that we have to work at constantly. When I took the Iowa Freedom of Information Council role, I realized that I'm never going to run out of things to do because it's you know, it is a constant process to remind people why all of this is important. Access to government meetings, government records. Uh, and I think it's the same on the intellectual freedom side that, you know, we're never going to solve the issue of access. It is something that we have to keep at constantly. It's like keeping the crabgrass out of your yard or keeping the dandelions out of your yard.
Right.
You've got to do it every year because they're going to come back. Uh, there's going to be new political leaders or new people who want to lead in a community, who want to lead through restriction rather than leading through access.
Right.
And that you would like to think that people would hear somebody as wise as Randy Evans talking and would say, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go do all that." But there are people who disagree with me, and people I'm friends with who would disagree with me.
Yeah.
Uh, and, so we will continue to have those conversations. And I just hope that uh, at some point people just say, no, you're right. We, we ought to leave it to the parents to decide what their kids are going to read. And at a certain age, it doesn't matter what the parents uh, want because the kids are going to find a way to work around that in terms of what they want to read or not read. Uh, and that's what the United States of America is all about, is the freedom to, uh, pick and choose. Uh, you know, Living in the United States is like going to a buffet. You can pick the three bean salad, or you can pick something over here. Nobody ought to be making you eat the three bean salad, but if that's what you want, you can have it. And if you don't want it, you don't have to. And it's the same with access to information.
I would suggest life is short, so starting with dessert is always my recommendation.
See? Yeah.
Um, but I think you're onto something there that I'd like to connect back to about your public persona and the responsibilities that you have assigned yourself by choosing this path. So, when you're on the grocery line, when you're at the bank, folks know you and the work that you do, and they give you feedback. And there's this discourse that you've opened yourself up to because of the role you've chosen. Similarly, I can't tell you some of the Cocoa Bananas places that I have helped folks grab ebooks, like and taught them Libby, and the dentist, practically in the chair, in cabs when I'm driving to and from. Like, do you have your library app? And I've opened myself up to that, and it makes me wonder about the role of caregivers and parents, where this was a life path that was chosen. So at some point, whether the child is ambulatory and making independent decisions or not, the role is still theirs to carry,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And,
So there's
and
freedom
it's,
of choice, right?
yeah. And, the, the technology, Libby, that you mentioned. I mean,
Yeah.
suddenly traveling has become a whole lot easier. You don't have to lug all these darned heavy books. Uh,
Yeah,
but
right.
my friend who uh, owned Prairie Lights or
Oh,
founded Prairie Lights
yeah.
would just cringe if I were suggesting Libby over somebody going to the store and buying a book.
Right.
Uh, so we need to be able to coexist. Uh,
Well said.
and
Yeah.
for the person who is, it's an either or. I'm either going to read through Libby or I'm not going to read at all. That's preferable. Uh, you
Yeah.
know, but we ought to find ways to tolerate each other more and recognize that living in the United States is not one size fits all.
No. So you've made me jazzed. You've made me really jazzed to hear about the work you're doing, and I'm hoping we'll take some opportunity here before we leave each other to inform us how we can support that work. But You also referencing friends that disagree with you, and that's strong friends indeed, right? I think
Yeah.
it's good to have that. So you normalizing that has me jazzed about intellectual freedom and where we're going to go with it. Can I ask what has you jazzed about the intellectual freedom landscape? Is there anything right now with Iowa and the second most library diverse bills in the nation? Is there anything that
Well,
you feel jazzed about?
so, you said you wanted stories. So I was doing a series of training programs across the state in
Mhm.
my professional capacity on access to courtrooms in Iowa by journalists
Yeah.
and what the rules are. Uh, and so what I found was that uh, the very best place to have these, and there were probably 12 to 15 sessions that we did from border to border. And the place that we found that was the best place to go was to the public library.
That's
I
awesome.
am jazzed by the facilities that are out there in Iowa. Uh, the meeting spaces, the staff, uh, the almost no cost, low cost to no cost uh, availability of these spaces. Uh, you know, this is something that is a tremendous resource for the state of Iowa. One of my colleagues from my days at the Des Moines Register, he decided to uh, he wanted to own his own newspaper, and he bought the hometown newspaper in Moville, Iowa, Woodbury County, uh, and he owned the newspaper for 30 plus years, and he died in 2023.
I'm sorry.
Uh, and he was a reader. His mother was the one who got him reading. Uh, and when he didn't have a big family, so he when he died, he donated his books to the Moville Public Library,
Wow.
and his memorial contributions went to the Moville Public Library.
Wow.
And Bloomfield, the library that I grew up in, uh, here in the last 10 years has built a significant addition on. Uh, and it was something that was bankrolled in large part by donors in the community.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's one of the interesting tidbits is that among the regular patrons of the Bloomfield Public Library are uh, Amish families in the community, in the county. The Amish are big readers. They're not
Yes.
watching television, they're not using social media, they're reading.
Right.
Uh, so I'm jazzed by the public libraries in Iowa, even though, I might smack a library now and then for uh, decisions that I might not disagree with. And I think that
Yeah.
we ought to be able to disagree with each other without being disagreeable.
Yeah. I love that for us too because I think it makes us stronger together. And it's all a learning process, which sort of takes us to our last question. I was going to ask you what you're learning, but I want to also add how can we support you in that journey, in the work and the learning that you do.
Well, I mean, you will find when your hair turns the color of mine that one of the
Yeah.
things that you are regretting is that there aren't enough hours in the day. Uh, that when I walked into the Bloomfield Library that first time and was amazed by these shelves and bookcases that were just filled, and I thought, how am I ever going to read all of these? And I'm losing ground. I'm losing ground. Uh, so Libby has made it easier uh, to to read on the go or to listen on the go.
Yeah.
Uh, and, so that has, uh, you know, I'm concerned about, not being able to consume and learn as much as I ought to. And one of the things that is, part of just about every journalist I know is a desire to learn about whatever it is they're writing about. And so, every time I encounter an issue that I'm going to write about in the column, I
Mhm.
suddenly have veered off down the road into, reading and uh, learning more about that topic. You ask about how people can support the work that my organization does. The best way they can support it is putting the sunshine laws to work in their community. Uh,
Okay.
it doesn't it doesn't mean that they have to write a big fat check to the Iowa FOI Council, although we're an equal opportunity acceptor of big fat checks. But if they engage in their local governments, whether it's at the school board level, the county government, the city council, uh, you know, expressing their opinions to city leaders about supporting libraries, for example. I'm just nervous as a cat that we're going to want to uh, cut the budgets of public libraries in Iowa to help balance budgets. And, uh, I don't want a situation to develop where uh, the little Randy Evanses of the world can't be led into their public library by their mother
Yeah.
and turned loose in there because the library can only be open 4 hours a day, or it can't be open on that day of the week. Uh, and that's
Yeah.
the way people can best support freedom of information in the Iowa Freedom of Information Council.
Well, because I know there are not enough hours in the day, despite this current color I'm rocking, I want to say thank you for giving me an hour of your time today. Thank you for the gifts of your perspective and wisdom, but also just thank you for the excellent work that you have done for intellectual freedom and freedom of information for our state and the world around it that you've impacted. Randy, I really appreciate your time, and I will make sure to drop your information in the description of this video.
Good.
Is there anything you'd like to impart to our audience before we conclude?
The only thing I would say is that uh, Iowa needs more Sam Helmicks.
Oh, they definitely need more
You
Randy
know,
Evans. I do
the
too.
uh, people who can energize us about learning and access to books and magazines and all sorts of stuff. And, if there was a bookmobile in Bloomfield, I would have been out on the street corner even more than I was.
Thank you, Randy. It's been a delight. You take care.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.